I'm Stephanie, and welcome to Fiction Files. This is the playlist where I talk about all things writing, and today I'm going to talk about how to plot your novel with the 3-act structure. It's a classic writing rivalry, plotters versus pantsers. Plotters tend to outline and structure their novel before writing, whereas pantsers fly by the seat of their pants and see where the story takes them. Both are fine methods to getting your story written, as either way, you'll end up revising your story to check its structure and make sure it hits all the major beats. But if you want to do the heavy lifting up front and plot your novel before writing, but aren't quite sure where to start, let's start with the classic story structure that's comprised of 3 acts. In this video, I'm sharing how you can plan your story's 3 acts and learn about the major beats or scenes that should be within each act. So let's go ahead and talk about plotting your novel with a 3-act structure. Act 1. The beginning. Act 1 is all about the setup and preparing the protagonist for the journey ahead. This act establishes their status quo world, their problem, and their goals. We need to know why this story is important, who it's happening to, and what's on the line if the protagonist rejects their call to adventure. The major beats in Act 1 include the opening scene, where you show us the protagonist in action and introduce their goals, flaws, and where they are. We should get a snapshot look at this character's life and why they're about to be the main player in this specific story. The inciting incident or catalyst. This beat pushes or pulls the protagonist into the story. The protagonist must act or choose to react to something that happens to them. And the Act 1 problem. Here, the stakes are raised. The protagonist has the choice to move into it or debate their choice of actually taking action. But we know they're going to take action or be forced into it, otherwise we wouldn't have a story. Act 2 is the middle. The middle is where the action happens, and the part that most book blurbs blab about. This is where the premise comes into play, and we see the protagonist struggle or succeed in their new world. Most often, you'll want your Act 2 world to be an upside-down version of the Act 1 world, or at least be different enough to show the difference between their status quo and their new place. Take Harry Potter as an example. In the first act, he's in London with his wretched Muggle family, but in the second act, he's in a whole new world at Hogwarts, surrounded by witches and wizards. These worlds and acts couldn't be any more different. The major beats in Act 2 to include the Act 2 choice, or break into 2. This is also known as crossing the threshold, and now the protagonist is invested in this journey. There's no going back, and they're now facing obstacles or challenges they'd only encounter in the Act 2 world. The B story. This is where your protagonist meets new friends, allies, or enemies. This is also where a love interest can be introduced, or that plotline strengthened. Most protagonists aren't going to go on this journey alone. So give them some B-story friends to help them along the way, and even be the voice of reason behind your story's theme. The fun and games. This beat spans several scenes, but shows your protagonist succeeding or failing in the Act 2 world. Just because the beat is called fun and games, it might not be much fun for the protagonist. This beat allows you to show what your protagonist is really made of as they face new challenges and win or fail. The midpoint. Something happens that throws the protagonist's world upside down, raises the stakes, and sounds the alarm that things have to change if the protagonist wants to achieve their goal. And lastly, the Act 2 disaster, also known as the all is lost beat. This is where the protagonist is met with a major setback and forced to face the truth and discard the lie they've used as armor. They'll often wallow a bit during the dark night of the soul beat and probably feel like giving up. A B-story character can help them persevere or find their own inner strength to keep going. Act 3. The ending. The protagonist has gone through the fun and games and faced their lowest point. Now it's time to bring them into the light and back on top. They've learned what they needed to learn from this journey, and they're ready to merge their Act 1 and Act 2 worlds into their new normal. It's the exciting finale of Act 3 that will get them there. The major beats to include in Act 3 are the Act 3 plan or break into 3. This beat is where the protagonist knows what they have to do to win, and now they have the strength for their final push. The climax. It's the final fight and showdown between the protagonist and antagonist. It's where we see the protagonist embrace the new version of himself and defeat the antagonist. The new normal, or the final image. Most often, the final image will be a mirror of the opening image to show how much the protagonist has changed or grown over the course of the story. We see them in their new normal and finally living as their true self. Do you include any other beats in your 3-act structure? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching Fiction Files.